Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. Joining us today is security expert. He is the head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore, Rohan Gunaratna. Rohan, good to have you here in Manila.
It is very good to see you, Maria.
So, what are we facing? How do you look at the region today in terms of security?
As the battle space shrinks in Iraq and Syria, we are seeing expansion, a global expansion of IS, the so-called Islamic State. This group is now expanding into parts of Africa, Middle East, the Caucasus, and Asia. In Southeast Asia, the single biggest threat the entire region is facing is from terrorism and ideological extremism. In the Philippines, we witnessed Marawi, a battle that lasted 5 months. But the terrorist threat is not over. The remnants of IS that fought in Marawi, they are regrouping and reorganizing. They want to come back. Similarly, in Indonesia, we have seen a spate of attacks. In Malaysia, we have seen a spate of attacks, especially in Sabah, and so many arrests in the region. So terrorism will remain the tier 1 national security threat in 2018. Other than that, of course, the region faces main challenges: North Korea, the South China Seas, and a number of other issues. But the presidents, prime ministers, ministers, national security leaders, law enforcement and intelligence services are currently tied up controlling and containing the movement of terrorist money and terrorist activity.
There are new governments in Southeast Asia. How would you assess the way they're cooperating with each other? I mean, we've watched this over the last 3 decades, the shift with each government. There's a new set of leaders. How are they dealing with it, with this new environment?
Governments must cooperate, but they must move beyond from cooperation to collaboration. That is, to build common databases, because many of the challenges are trans-border, whether it is terrorism, whether it is piracy, whether it is drug smuggling, whether it is cyber. So the first step is to build common databases. Second is exchange personnel between countries. Third is joint training, because if you train together, you build friendships. And then joint operations. Joint training leads to joint operations. Then sharing of experience, expertise, and resources. So unless there's a movement from cooperation to collaboration, the threat in this region will grow. For example, before Marawi, we knew the flow of foreign fighters, both through the front door and the back door. They were flying.
You were talking about it for a long time.
To Manila, then take the connecting flight to Cagayan de Oro, and joined the Islamic State Lanao, led by the Maute brothers. Another group arriving through Sandakan, Tawi-Tawi, into Sulu, Basilan, then Zamboanga, and entering the Philippines through the back door and joining. Then we saw the movement of money, so much of money. But all these indicators and all these signs and clues, there was no proper assessment, no proper sharing. If there was, Marawi could have been prevented.
Were governments aware of all of these things? I mean, was it a failure of intelligence or a failure of the governments to act on the intelligence?
There was intelligence, but it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Everyone has a piece. They must all piece it together. But even if you have the dots, if you don't connect the dots, then you will still not have the full picture. So it's a failure to appreciate intelligence and act.
Just February, the U.S. State Department declared ISIS Philippines a foreign terrorist organization, and that includes the Maute group. Was that surprising? How will that help the effort?
The Americans have developed a very deep understanding of the networks in Southeast Asia, especially in the Philippines, because they have had a very long presence in the Philippines. They have very good experts on the Philippines, and they very correctly assessed that Isnilon Hapilon, that had taken a pledge of allegiance to IS, appointed as the IS leader for Philippines, ISP, Islamic State Philippines, moved from Basilan to mainland Mindanao. Then he linked up with the Islamic State Lanao led by the Maute group, the Maute brothers, Omar Khayyam Maute and Abdullah Maute, and they staged Marawi together. They were joined by several other smaller groups. And what we saw was that the warnings given by the US was accurate. In fact, it was dead accurate. And I believe that that cooperation and collaboration should exist not only within this region, but with the extra regional powers that are now competing in this region.
So as this global power structure is adjusting, and the Philippines is playing a large role in this, right? It's pivoting away. Our President Duterte actually said the Philippines will pivot away from the United States to China and Russia. How does this affect the fight for terrorism, or does it not at all?
President Duterte understands that Americans and Europeans do not have the same amount of resources that China has. So he wants to link up with China. And he also wants to work with Russia and with India. So these are the new powers that are exerting influence in this region, in the Southeast Asian region. We are also seeing a shift from the Asia-Pacific to the Indo-Pacific region. So there's severe geopolitical and geo-economic or geostrategic competition. And there are new players. Governments should develop equidistance foreign policies in order to manage the risks so that they can survive. So naturally, Philippines, traditional ally of the United States, is now building partnerships with these new friends, and it is a challenge for both the governments and for those extra-regional partners.
Does China have the same appreciation of the terrorist threats, and is it willing to jump in the same way?
Chinese are 10 to 20 years behind the Western nations in fighting terrorism. The Europeans and the Americans are 10 to 20 years ahead of China. But China is also learning fast, because China shares a border with Pakistan and Afghanistan, the western border, Xinjiang, and that is China's front line against terrorism. But China will take many more years to build the level of competence that the Western nations have of fighting terrorism. But Chinese economic assistance to Philippines is vital, because as you know, security and stability is based on economic growth and economic stability. So President Duterte will have to build both a very strong economic base and also a very strong security base in order to keep all these actors and players together. He faces twin threats, both from the Islamists and from the communists.
Yes. Sorry, I'll go back to the Islamic State. I mean, who is the new leader of the Islamic State?
The leader of the Islamic State was Isnilon Hapilon. His operational leader was Abdullah Maute.
Yes.
And both these people have been killed. There was a very important figure that was involved in the planning and the execution of Marawi. That is a man called Najd Abdul Humam, alias Abu Dar. He, you know from your own research and your own writing, he was the founder of a group called Khilafah Islamia Mindanao. It's a name given by the Filipino intelligence service.
Yes.
And he was also very closely associated with the earlier group called Jamaat Tawhid wal Jihad.
Yeah.
So he was in Marawi. He's a Marawi veteran. And now he is the new leader of IS. With him there's another leader who is competing for that same position. That is a man called Abu Turaipi, who was previously with BIFF, the Bangsa Moro Islamic Freedom Fighters. But these two are the key leaders of IS that have succeeded Isnilon Hapilon. One is operating in the Maguindanao region and the other is operating in the Lanao region.
How would you gauge the threat today?
There will be no siege like Marawi because the armed forces of the Philippines are very well prepared.
Yes.
The Philippine police, the Philippine intelligence services are oriented to this kind of threat. But the threat of bombings, the threat of assassination, the threat of armed assault still exists. The terrorists can operate and mount attacks in Visayas, in Luzon, other than in Mindanao. But these will be more in the form of terrorism rather than in the form of a siege of a city.
If the peace agreement isn't passed, what do you see happening in the region?
MILF is already working very closely with the government of the Philippines, and that relationship is paramount. Government should continue to work with MILF because they are an asset today in the fight against the newly emerging IS-centric threat in the Philippines. And MILF under Haji Murad is different from Hashim Salamat.
Yes.
Hashim Salamat had so many links with terrorism. Haji Murad is different. Yes. He don't want MILF to be associated with terrorism. And I think that President Duterte should do everything possible to work with Hashim Salamat and to have a resolution of the genuine grievances and the aspirations of the Moro people. But I must also share with you that it is important to devolve power in all areas, not only in one particular area. And because late devolution can always lead to separatism. So government must be very careful of devolving power only to one particular area. Federal solution is much more acceptable and will be more strategic. I also want to share with you that the threat of terrorism will persist even if there is a resolution to the Moro issue, because IS is not asking for a separate state. IS is a fight against the believers, against the disbelievers.
Yes. Us against them.
Absolutely. So what we are seeing is the IS fight will continue even if the Moro issues have been resolved.
One of the most potent tools of the Islamic State was social media. Is this still something, now that they've been curtailed in Iraq and Syria, and the propaganda machine has devolved, I suppose, right? I mean, is this still a potent threat that governments in the region should be looking at?
According to the CIA, 31,500 foreign fighters traveled from 120 countries around the world into Iraq and Syria. This IS was able to do because of its mastery of social media. There's a man called Junaid Hussain, a British national of Pakistani heritage. He attacked Tony Blair's website. And then in 2011-2012, he was imprisoned. Then after that, he traveled to Syria to set up the cyber caliphate. Then he built this cyber capability within IS. And that is his publicity and appeal of a caliphate attracted so many people to come to Syria and Iraq. Today, IS has shrunk in the physical space, but in the cyberspace, IS is still very capable. So I want to share with you that this issue has not been addressed by governments. Governments are crawling when IS is sprinting when it comes to social media. So governments must invest more in controlling and containing the spread of terrorist propaganda in cyberspace. Also, the terrorists are using encryption. This remains a huge challenge for governments. So these issues will have to be addressed. While taking care of privacy issues, it is important to address the terrorist misuse of the internet.
Okay. Any last thoughts, Rohan? Are you, sorry, before that, following on that, are you seeing action by the platforms, by Facebook, by Twitter, to deal with terrorists, with the abuse of the platforms?
Facebook, Twitter, and other companies
Google,
have done,
YouTube,
Google,
right?
YouTube, they have done a remarkable job. I want to share with you that we used to blame them in the past, but now they have taken the threat seriously. They have created huge capabilities because they understand that their platforms were used to kill people, were used to spread hatred, and today they are on board. Governments should continue to work with them, and they should continue to work with government. So this partnership is essential between the media and government. Without such a partnership, I believe that the threat of ideological extremism and terrorism will persist and may even grow.
Last thoughts, your trip to the Philippines.
Philippines did a remarkable job of containing the IS threat, but the threat is far from over. Government will have to work even more closely with neighboring countries because there's a flow of foreign fighters. There are about 40 foreign fighters currently based in the southern Philippines. Government will also have to do everything possible to work with the communists. Of course, there comes a point where when these groups are no longer willing to genuinely cooperate and collaborate, then of course the military forces, the police will have to deal with them. But I want to share with you that the security and stability of the Philippines depends on two things. One is economic growth, economic development. Second is working with the regional and the extra-regional powers. I believe that if this can be done, then Philippines will develop and terrorism will become a lesser threat in the Philippines. But right now, the single biggest terrorist threat in this region is located in Mindanao. Although IS structures were dismantled in Marawi at great cost, still IS maintains a very significant training and operational presence in the south of the Philippines. And it is imperative for governments in the region to work with the Philippines to contain, isolate, and eliminate that threat.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Rohan Gunaratna. He's an author of Inside Al-Qaeda, which really triggered the research into these the networks in our region. He's also the head of ICPVTR, the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research. I'm Maria Ressa. Thanks for joining us.